Laurie Cohn and her daughter Jackie were never really close.
I don't think they got along very well.
But then Jack Cohn, Laurie's husband and Jackie's father, was murdered in a home invasion.
He's all bloody on the floor.
And he was beaten to death.
It was just overkill. Just brutal.
At first, the tragedy brought the two women together.
They both appeared to be distraught and surprised.
But then...
they started turning on each other.
And when the finger-pointing stopped, it would be up to the police to untangle the secrets revealed and find the true killer.
People will do crazy stuff to get whatever they're addicted to.
San Bernardino, California, April 2nd, 2012. It was a little after 4 o'clock in the morning when 23-year-old Jackie Cohn called 911, worried about the safety of her father, 64-year-old Jack Cohn. Jackie and her mother had just come home and discovered a break-in.
The door's wide open, his truck's gone, and I'm outside because I don't know if he's here or not, but it looks like they've been robbed.
While Jackie dialed 911, her mother, 47-year-old Laurie Cohn, had stepped inside. But she quickly came back out and took the phone from her daughter.
Everything's ransacked, turned upside down, and I can't find my husband.
Then, still on the phone with the dispatcher, Laurie walked back into the house, going deeper into the back bedroom, searching for her husband.
Jack, what kind of car does your husband drive?
Laurie never answered the question. In one of the back rooms, she had finally found Jack.
God, he's all bloody on the floor.
He's there now?
He's on the floor, all bloody.
Okay, stay on the phone with me. I'm sending the police and paramedics right now.
But when the police and paramedics arrived, there was nothing they could do for Jack.
He's been beaten to death in a very brutal fashion. He had been bound with wire and duct tape.
There was blood splatter everywhere.
Why Jack would be the target of a violent home invasion robbery wasn't hard to guess.
Jack was a licensed gun dealer. He had hundreds of guns.
But other than that, the police had little to go on. When questioned at the scene, Laurie told the police that she and Jackie had been away that evening, enjoying a girls' night out.
Laurie and Jackie Cohn were at a casino gambling late into the night together.
And then she had come home to find Jack brutally murdered.
She found him dead on the floor of his bedroom.
And by the time friends and neighbors heard the news and began gathering outside the house, Laurie had lost all composure.
Laurie was on the front lawn crying.
She was just a sobbing mess. I remember just tears running down her face, and they were trying to interview her, and she was just inconsolable.
And it wasn't hard to see why, based on what Laurie told the police about her relationship with her dead husband.
She said that he was her best friend.
Born in 1965, California native Laurie Jean Gibson wasn't normally the type to break down in tears.
She had sort of an imposing presence, a commanding presence.
She's a big, tough-looking, confident woman. I would say she was fearless.
She'd had to be. Laurie grew up poor, and she'd started working at 15. Out on her own since she graduated high school, Laurie had hit rock bottom when she met Jack in 1984.
She had no place to go, no money, no nothing.
Temporarily homeless, the 19-year-old was drifting around San Bernardino doing odd jobs to survive when an acquaintance did her a favor and took her in.
He hired Laurie to do some work on their home. She was painting and doing other things.
While living there, Laurie also met her friend's brother, Jack Cohn. 17 years older than Laurie, Chicago native and Army veteran Jack Cohn ran a modestly successful San Bernardino TV repair business.
Jack Cohn had been there a long time. His business was well known. A lot of people had had their TVs repaired by him.
He also had a license to buy and sell guns.
He was a firearms dealer and apparently quite good at it. He had a thriving business.
He was well known in the community.
And he was generally well liked.
He was funny and sweet and generous, and he liked a good meal. He liked a good laugh.
If he was a friend of yours, he'd give you the shirt off his back. Anything that he had was yours.
Both of them loved her. They doted on her.
Especially Jack.
Jack loved the ground that girl walked on.
She was a daddy's girl.
Laurie continued to lend a hand around the shop while raising their daughter. Then, once Jackie started school, she took a more active role, helping Jack branch out into a new business, satellite TV.
She was running several crews of installers, putting satellite dishes on houses.
He was one of the biggest direct TV guys, I think, out west. And he won a lot of awards.
Although Laurie deserved a lot of the credit, now entering her 30s, she was truly coming into her own as an equal partner in the business.
She described herself as a hard-charging businesswoman.
And in the early 2000s, Laurie was finally a married woman, too.
They went up to Victorville to that little chapel and got married.
It was a quiet ceremony, much like their relationship. Already together for more than a decade, Laurie and Jack's marriage seemed to work for them, even if they weren't the most affectionate couple.
Never in all the years that I knew them did I ever hear them say, "I love you." They never kissed each other. Goodbye, hello.
Newly married and now in his 50s, Jack was already looking forward to retirement.
He loved to play golf. He'd play golf 7 days a week if he could.
Laurie, only in her mid-30s when the couple married, liked a little more excitement.
She was fun. She liked to go out. She liked to drink.
She also liked to gamble, hitting the tables at one of San Bernardino's local casinos.
She would go with friends.
We always gambled for a couple of 3 hours.
For the most part, Jack was more than happy to give Laurie a little time alone with her girlfriends.
Jack used to take us out for dinner before we went.
But even as Laurie and Jack settled into what appeared to be a comfortable routine, trouble arose.
They'd had some difficulties with their daughter.
Daddy's little girl had become quite a handful as a teenager.
She had problems in school. She had problems with everything.
And she especially had problems with her mother.
Jackie's relationship with her mother sounded really rocky. I don't think they got along very well.
She was better at putting her foot down than Jack was.
Laurie wanted to set more rules.
Jack, on the other hand, indulged his daughter, same as always, causing some friction with his wife.
Jack just spoiled Jackie and gave her everything she wanted.
Anytime that she wanted money, she went to Dad.
He couldn't say no.
However, by the time Jackie finished high school, there was no denying that she was headed for trouble. Within the next few years, she'd had several children and a failed marriage, and eventually, she had turned to drugs.
She was involved in methamphetamine, using it. There were some allegations that she had been selling methamphetamine.
Whether she was dealing or not, Jackie definitely stole to support her habit, a fact that led to the 23-year-old's arrest in early 2012.
Jackie was in jail for a period of time.
Jack was devastated by his daughter's arrest.
Laurie Cohn described Jack Cohn trying to protect her from the consequences of her behavior.
When she was released in late March, her doting father rushed to welcome her back.
When she came out of the jail, Jack was there ready to help her out.
He always took care of her without any hesitation.
And in a surprising reversal, Laurie appeared happy to have her daughter back, too. On the night of April 1st, Laurie decided to put their past differences behind them and invited her daughter out for the evening.
She and Jackie had gone out gambling.
But early that morning, as they drove home at 4 a.m., a shocking discovery was about to put a serious damper on their attempt at reconciliation. Coming up, Laurie swears vengeance on Jack's killer.
I swear as God is my witness, I will see you rot in hell.
But what if that somebody is her own daughter?
She said if Jackie did the crime, she has to do the time.
On April 2nd, 2012, Laurie Cohn discovered her 64-year-old husband, Jack Cohn, beaten to death in their San Bernardino, California home.
Jack had been beaten badly. He had blood all over his face, all over his body.
It was overkill. Just brutal.
But was the brutal murder the reason for the break-in? Or was Jack simply collateral damage? When the police arrived on the scene, it looked as if Jack was the victim of a home invasion.
Their first impression was that somebody broke into this house and encountered this guy trying to rob him.
People knew he had a business. It's reasonable to think that he might have cash, and valuables laying around.
Not only were there TVs and electronics related to his TV repair and satellite business, the fact that Jack was also a licensed gun dealer made him a doubly attractive target.
There's a significant gang problem in San Bernardino County and in that surrounding area. So I'm sure they thought about gangs who would want to get his weapons.
Jack had thought long and hard about it too, storing his weapons in a special locked room behind a security door.
He was really protective about his guns.
He had video cameras all around the house, and he had video cameras inside the house.
It was like a fortress. There was never a way for me to get in there without somebody from the inside letting me in.
However, on the night of his murder, Jack's elaborate security had done nothing to deter the thieves. His killers had cleaned out his gun room, taken his truck to haul the loot, and stolen the digital video recorder wired into the surveillance cameras.
The DVR was an important piece of information in that it contained video, perhaps of the actual killer in the house.
There was one thing the thieves didn't take, however: the contents of the shop's safe.
They never got into the safe. There was $9,000 in there.
It wasn't for lack of trying. It appeared that in an effort to get the combination to the safe, the thieves had taken Jack alive.
It looked like he'd been surprised because he was still in his underwear from sleeping, and he was pulled from the bed on the floor and he was bound.
He had the cords going around his wrists and his ankles and tied to his neck.
And when Jack had refused to give up the combination to the safe, the thief or thieves had apparently resorted to torture.
Things went bad and he was beaten to death.
It appeared to be a stroke of luck that his wife and daughter hadn't suffered a similar fate.
The night of the homicide, Laurie and Jackie Cohn were at a casino gambling late into the night together.
At the scene, Laurie and her daughter both appeared to be devastated by Jack's death.
They both appeared to be distraught and surprised by what they had encountered.
But were all their tears sincere? To the investigators, the fact that the thieves had easily defeated Jack's security suggested an inside job. And it didn't take much police work to identify who had most likely tipped off the killers.
Jackie was a known addict. She had just gotten out of jail, so it wasn't hard to believe that she may have been involved in this robbery.
Had Jackie tipped off some friends, sending them to the house while she and her mother were out? That night, when the police brought mother and daughter down to the station to take their formal statements, Laurie appeared confused and shocked that someone would murder the man who had been her friend and lover for more than 20 years.
Do you have any idea who would hurt him?
No, because he was the nicest guy in the world. He would have gave anybody anything out of that shop if they came to rob him.
She couldn't imagine anybody doing this to Jack. He was a really social guy who would give the shirt off his back to anybody. He didn't have any enemies, so she was shocked that this happened to him.
But she also said some things that suggested she shared the investigators' suspicions about her daughter.
Laurie told the detectives that perhaps they ought to be looking at her daughter Jackie because of her drug use and the types of people that she associated with.
She just got out of jail. She got sentenced to felony probation.
But then, when the police asked Laurie point blank whether she thought Jackie was involved, Laurie appeared to have second thoughts.
Laurie tells police that her daughter had nothing to do with the murder.
She was the daddy's girl anyway.
Laurie's claim may have been true. Jackie may not have known anything about her father's murder. But did that rule out the robbery?
Jackie could have simply told some of her addict friends, hey, my dad has some guns, he has some TVs, here's how you get around the security, never thinking that her dad might end up dead.
And even if Jackie had been in on the crime, there was still one problem. She had a pretty good alibi.
They had been at the casino all night.
We were there until 4 this morning, 3:45. We were just playing casino and got in the car, stopped at Carl's Jr., and went home.
At least that's what Laurie said. But was there something she wasn't telling the investigators? At the end of the interview, the investigators decided to try and rule out the possibility that Laurie could be covering for her daughter.
Would you be willing to take a polygraph test?
Laurie agreed. In fact, when the investigators stepped out of the room moments later, she vowed to herself that she would see that Jack's killer was brought to justice.
I swear as God is my witness, I will see you rot in hell.
She was going to seek revenge and make sure that somebody paid for this.
But despite Laurie's assurances, the police still suspected that someone just might be Jackie. Once her mother's interview was over and the investigators went to get Jackie for her statement, they discovered that the 23-year-old was far less distraught than she had been at the crime scene.
She had fallen asleep at the station.
It was a telling change for the investigators, especially in light of what they knew about Jackie's drug addiction.
Jackie could have been coming down from methamphetamine. It's very typical to be up for extended periods of time, days at a time, and then they crash, and no matter what the circumstances are around them, they just crash and go to sleep.
Whatever the reason, the resulting interview was disappointing.
She really could not provide much information.
I just want to get this out. I want to go. No, literally, trust me.
And when Jackie left the station that morning with her mother, her apparent lack of concern over finding her father's killer did little to deter the investigators' suspicion.
Between her behavior and her background, she really looked like a strong suspect.
Of course, she did have an alibi. And since she and her mother had supposedly spent the night in a casino, it would be easy to confirm.
And one of the good things about a casino is they have the best video equipment in the world.
When the investigators pulled the video, it confirmed that Laurie and Jackie had both spent the evening at the casino.
When the Coens said they were at the casino at a certain time, the police very quickly and easily verified that information.
There was never any dispute about it.
But it wouldn't be long before the investigators were wondering if that was all part of the plan. Coming up, Jackie reveals a shocking secret about her mother.
I think she knew what right thing to do at that time was.
And the police close in on another suspect.
A guy went running out the back door.
By the afternoon of April 3rd, 2012, it had been more than 24 hours since 64-year-old Jack Cohn was found bludgeoned to death in his San Bernardino, California home.
He was bound with wires. He had tape wrapped around him. He was just bloody and brutally murdered.
The police believed his murder was the result of a home invasion robbery.
They find the house ransacked. Weapons, rifles have been taken.
And they wondered whether Jack's 23-year-old daughter, Jackie, had been in on the crime.
Jackie spent some time in jail, and it was one of the reasons why they had some suspicion about her.
However, there were a couple of things that gave the investigators pause. The first was the fact that Jackie appeared to have a solid alibi. When the murder occurred, she had been at a local casino with her mother, 47-year-old Laurie Cohn.
Police were able to confirm this by surveillance video of Laurie and Jackie at the casino.
And the second came that afternoon when Laurie arrived to take a polygraph test. According to the results, when the police started asking Laurie questions about Jack's murder, she started lying.
The polygraph examiner told the detectives that they felt that Laurie was being deceptive.
But why would Laurie lie? Was she simply covering for her daughter? Or Was there more to it? For the moment, the investigators weren't sure, because when they told Laurie the results of the polygraph and began to press her for answers, she abruptly ended the interview.
She bolted, she ran out of the room.
Kind of odd behavior for a woman who says she had nothing to do with the crime.
Did Laurie's reaction mean she was somehow involved in Jack's murder? A possible answer came the next day when the investigators received an urgent call from a police detective in the neighboring city of Rialto.
He had a person who wanted to talk to the detectives about the Jack Cohn murder case.
And when the investigators arrived at the Rialto Police Department,
lo and behold, they found Jackie Cohn there. And Jackie was crying.
I think she knew what the right thing to do at that time was, and that was just to come clean.
Once in the interrogation room, the story Jackie started telling them was, in some ways, exactly what the investigators were expecting: a tale of addiction.
She had a drug problem.
However, according to Jackie, she wasn't the only addict in the family. She told the police that her mother, Laurie, had a serious gambling problem.
She was addicted to gambling in the worst way.
She definitely lived for that gambling high.
Jackie told the investigators that over the last several years, Laurie's habit of gambling for fun had grown into a full-fledged addiction.
It got to the point where she was gambling almost every day.
Jackie claimed that her mother was losing almost every day, too.
She would lose thousands of dollars at a time.
Sometimes she won big, and I guess that was enough, like other gamblers who have that sort of addiction, to keep her going back and back.
And as Laurie's addiction deepened, Jackie said that her mother resorted to desperate measures to feed her habit.
Laurie would very often take money out of the cash register to go to the casino.
She started taking his stuff and started pawning it and hawking it so she could get money to gamble.
As shocking as that was, Jackie had yet another revelation about her mother. She claimed that by 2011, her mother's gambling addiction had led to another addiction: methamphetamines.
She ended up doing meth with her daughter and her daughter's friends.
Although according to Jackie, her mother didn't take meth to get high.
She took the meth so that she'd be wired and she'd spend the whole night and into the early morning hours at the casinos.
People will do crazy stuff to get whatever they're addicted to.
Jackie told the police that her father knew all about Laurie's gambling.
On more than one occasion, they fought over it.
Jackie claimed that the fights had grown more heated as her mother's losses mounted.
He worked too hard for his money just to give it away.
And she said that in early 2012, some 4 months before his murder, her father had finally had enough.
Jack said, "Get out." Laurie left the house, and Jack changed the locks on the house.
She had no access to money or even her personal property that was in the house.
According to Jackie, after Jack kicked her mother out, Laurie fell in with a rough crowd: the dealers and addicts who had kept Laurie and her daughter supplied with drugs.
All of the people involved in the circle of friends with Laurie Cohn and her daughter Jackie Cohn were really all known to be methamphetamine users.
She got involved with some pretty raunchy people.
Jackie claimed that her mother had spent the next few months essentially homeless, living the life of a meth addict.
She kind of just stayed at people's homes kind of randomly.
And then, once Jackie got out of jail, Laurie reconnected with her daughter, including their night out on the evening of Jack's murder.
Jackie Cohn was living at the house, and Laurie had come over and picked her up. They went to the casino.
If your mom and dad are having so much trouble that they're talking about separation, divorce, why would you go gambling with your mom?
According to Jackie, they were on their way home from the casino when her mother's phone rang.
Jackie has her mother's phone in her hand, and she sees a telephone call coming in, and she looks at the caller ID, and the name on the phone is Shauna Bayless.
Jackie told the investigators that Shauna was a friend of her mother's, one of the people she had crashed with after Jack threw her out.
Shauna's house was somewhat of a haven to a lot of methamphetamine users, a lot of gang members, and a lot of people who'd been in trouble with the law.
Even more interesting for the investigators, Jackie said that Shauna had called her mother with an urgent question about keys. Jack's keys, she was pretty sure.
He had a key ring that my grammar school janitor would be proud of. He had hundreds of keys.
Although according to Jackie, Laurie and Shauna's hushed conversation centered on one key in particular.
Laurie turned away and talked to Shauna and said, "It's the green one."
And that was the key for the gate.
If what Jackie was telling the police was true, she had overheard Laurie telling Jack's killer how to get into the house. On April 4th, 2012, a little more than 48 hours after she'd called 911 and reported that Jack was dead, the police placed Laurie Cohn under arrest.
She was originally charged with murder and conspiracy to commit murder.
That same day, the police knocked on Shauna Bayless's door. But that's when the story took a strange new twist. Even as the investigators handcuffed Shauna, an unidentified man bolted out of the back of her house.
A guy went running out the back door and jumped into the swimming pool.
Once the police fished him out of the pool, they identified the man as a career criminal named Gary Gallion.
He was an ex-con and really just a bad guy.
In fact, he was wanted for violating parole.
He had not been checking in with his parole officers.
But was that outstanding warrant the only reason he ran when the police showed up at Shauna's door?
At this point, police don't really know if he had anything to do with Jack's murder or if he just happened to be at Shauna's house.
Once in custody, Gary refused to talk, but not Shauna.
She dropped all the names and provided quite a bit of information.
And she started off with a confession.
She openly admitted her involvement.
Up to a point, that is. Shauna stopped short of confessing to murder.
It was supposed to go down like a robbery.
Shauna said that Laurie had been furious and broke once Jack kicked her out of the house. According to Shauna, Gary Gallion came into the picture once Laurie started talking about breaking in and robbing Jack.
Shauna was his friend.
And at some point, she introduces the two of them.
And once she had made the introduction, Gary and Laurie had begun plotting the robbery.
She told him how to get in there.
Shauna also claimed that Laurie had told Gary how to defeat Jack's security cameras.
Laurie told everybody that the first thing you do when you get into that room is get the DVR.
According to Shauna, the three conspirators swung into action on the evening of April 1st. Laurie headed off to the casino to establish an alibi.
She's there with her daughter, supposedly having a festive grand time.
And Shauna drove Gary to Jack's shop.
Did he go armed? I don't know. I have no idea. Do you know what I dropped him off.
Shauna said that Gary was supposed to steal Jack's truck for his getaway. But the plan hit a snag.
So he calls Shauna and says, "Hey, the gate's locked."
Shauna said that she had called Laurie, asking which of Jack's many keys would open the gate.
She tells me the green key, and her daughter's in the car when this conversation goes on. You can ask her daughter.
Shauna claimed that not long after, Gary had turned up at her house with a truckload of loot.
He had a television set in the truck. He had rifles in the pickup truck.
And it was only then, according to Shauna, that Gary told her that Jack had been murdered.
He ended up dying, and it was not cool. It wasn't cool.
Coming up, at trial, the prosecutors produced stunning new evidence.
She offered several $1,000s.
And Laurie turns on her daughter.
She said that Jackie begged her to go out to the casino.
On February 26, 2013, both Laurie Cohn and Gary Gallion stood trial at the San Bernardino County Courthouse.
Laurie and Gary were tried together. It was one prosecutor and two defense attorneys, and it was just one jury panel.
They were both charged with the April 2012 murder of Laurie's husband, Jack Cohn.
The prosecution believed that it was simply anger at Jack for kicking her out, but also that she had a financial motive.
The third member of the conspiracy, Shauna Bayless, had already confessed to helping Laurie recruit Gary Gallion.
Shauna's kind of the crux of all this.
However, she wasn't on trial, but she would appear in court as the star witness for the prosecution.
Shauna decides to take a plea bargain.
There were no such deals for Laurie and Gary. Both the accused mastermind and the alleged assassin had spent the past 9 months in jail.
Very few people bail out on a murder charge. It's usually $1 million bail, sometimes more.
And when Laurie sat down in court that morning, her old friends and neighbors hardly recognized her.
She had lost a lot of weight since she got arrested, probably, I would say, a good 100 pounds.
But in their opening statement, the prosecutors urged the jury to see Laurie for what she was, a gambling addict solely motivated by greed.
She wanted to feed the gambling addiction.
Then, the prosecutors called Laurie's daughter Jackie to the stand to explain how her mother's gambling had driven a wedge between her parents.
She talked about how there was this gambling addiction and there was this debt.
Jackie also testified about how shortly before his death, her father had kicked Laurie out of the house.
Jack was tired of her gambling and spending money and taking money to go to the casino and was trying to stop her.
According to the prosecution's theory, that's when Laurie hatched the plot that led to her husband's death.
That is what lit the fuse, so to speak.
On the second day of testimony, Shauna Bayless took the stand and described how she and Laurie had recruited Gary into what Shauna believed was simply a plot to rob Laurie's husband.
She talks about how Gary Gallion was involved. She talks about the plot to break in and steal this property, what Laurie Cohn had promised Gary Gallion.
There was cash in the safe and that there were an abundance of guns that could be sold for cash.
I'm sure Gary Gallion was motivated simply by age-old greed.
She also described how on the night of the murder, she had dropped Gary off outside the Cohn's house while Laurie was at the casino parading in front of the security cameras.
She's thinking, I've got the perfect alibi at the time that my husband's business is being invaded and he's being beaten to death. Why, here I am at the casino, and here's the camera to prove it.
Unfortunately, Laurie wasn't the only one who had been caught on camera.
Jack had installed several surveillance cameras around the property and inside the house.
According to Shauna, Laurie had tipped Gary off about the cameras and given him instructions to take the digital video recorder that they were wired into.
Gary takes the video recorder from inside the strong room.
He had hidden it and told Shauna where, a fact that she had later passed on to the police.
They found it in a trash can near a liquor store in San Bernardino.
And it was completely intact. There had been no attempt to try to destroy it.
At the end of Shauna's testimony, the prosecutors played the DVR footage for the jury.
And that was huge because there was video of somebody breaking into the gunroom inside Jack's house. And it was clear as day.
And since Jack's killer planned on taking the DVR, he wasn't all that careful about hiding his face.
At one point, Gary Gallion could be seen looking directly up at the camera with his entire full-face view.
The cameras didn't record Jack's murder, nor could they prove that Laurie intended for Gary to kill her husband. But according to the prosecutors, they had a witness who did. His name was Charles Duke, and he had come forward a few days after Jack's death.
He had heard about Jack Cohn's murder and that he wanted to make sure that nobody tried to implicate him.
And the reason that he was worried someone might implicate him ended up implicating Laurie.
Laurie Cohn had contacted him a few months earlier, asking him if he would kill her husband.
She offered several $1,000s.
That changed it from a robbery gone awry to this murder-for-hire plot.
In fact, according to the prosecution, Duke wasn't the only person Laurie tried to hire. just the first one to come forward.
She was reckless about her intent in doing away with her husband. She was basically cavalier about it.
And once Charles Duke finished testifying, several of the other men Laurie allegedly tried to hire took the stand too.
They had certainly overwhelming evidence.
Overwhelming or not, when it was the defense's turn, Gary Gallion took the stand and tried to shrug off the fact that the prosecutors apparently had him on video.
Gary said that that wasn't him.
I thought that was laughable.
So did the prosecutor.
He asks Gallion, "Sure looks like you." Gallion said, "Well, a lot of people look like me."
Besides, according to Gary, the man in the video couldn't be him.
Mr. Gallion testified that at the time of this murder, he was in fact breaking into hotel rooms in southern San Bernardino and stealing television sets.
And that's why he was in possession of televisions.
Gary also denied conspiring with Laurie to kill her husband. In fact, he denied even knowing Laurie.
The defense told jurors that Gary and Laurie had never met, that the first time they saw each other was during their arraignment.
True or not, Gary and the rest of the court would get another good look at Laurie on March 5th, when the murder's alleged mastermind took the stand in her own defense.
She was very sure of herself.
Although she wasn't above getting emotional.
She broke down a couple of times. When they put up pictures of Jack Cohn showing him right after the murder when he was bound and tied and beaten, she wouldn't look at the pictures. She looked away, and she cried when she talked about him.
And she was adamant that she had nothing to do with Jack's death, despite their differences.
She testified that she still loved him and things along those lines.
Tried to portray herself as this loyal, loving mother and wife.
But if that were true, why would Shauna Bayless and the other witnesses claim that Laurie had plotted to rob and murder her husband? According to Laurie, it was simple. She had been framed.
She said that she never had those conversations with people.
Instead, Laurie claimed that the real mastermind behind the murder and the frame-up was her daughter, Jackie.
It was crazy. Why would Daddy's little girl, the daughter, the one he gave everything to, want him dead?
It was shocking, perhaps, but according to Laurie, the fact that Jack gave her everything was precisely why his daughter wanted him dead.
Jackie was the only heir. They had put the house into Jackie's name prior to Jack's death, so she inherited the house. He ended up getting basically everything.
The way Laurie told it, that was why Jackie arranged her father's murder.
She said that Jackie begged her to go out the night that they went to the casino, that it was Jackie's idea to just have this evening at the casino together.
And according to Laurie, that was also why she had arranged for her mother to take the fall.
She did believe that Jackie put people up to saying things implicating Laurie.
I don't know if it's that surprising that they started turning on each other, because you have a mother and daughter who never really were that close.
Coming up, will the jury believe Laurie's story?
I really think that her daughter was in on it.
Or will it send her away?
She needs to pay for what she's done.
On March 12, 2013, at the San Bernardino County Courthouse, the jury announced that it had reached a verdict in the murder trial of Laurie Cohn and Gary Gallion. According to the prosecution, Laurie had hired Gary to rob and murder her husband, Jack Cohn, in order to finance her gambling addiction.
It sounded like Laurie wanted her husband dead and she wanted his money and his possessions.
Although at trial, Laurie claimed that it sounded like that for a reason. She had been framed by the crime's true mastermind, her daughter, Jackie.
Jackie was no saint, but it's hard to believe that a mother would throw her only child under the bus just so she wouldn't have to go to prison.
Would the jury believe her? Considering that Jackie was a drug addict who'd been released from jail just days before the murder, even family friends had a hard time dismissing the possibility that she might be involved.
I really think that her daughter was in on it.
I think she knew a lot more than what everybody says.
But when the verdict was read, it was clear that the jurors didn't share those doubts. They found both Laurie and Gary guilty of murder.
I remember sitting with the family members, and we all were holding hands, and we squeezed each other, and we said, yes.
At the defense table, Laurie showed no such emotion.
The only tell sign was that her leg rapidly shook as the verdict was being read.
However, despite her impassive poker face, the compulsive gambler had just lost the biggest bet in her life. She and Gary Gallion were both given the maximum sentence for their involvement in the murder.
She was given a sentence of life without possibility of parole.
She will never get out of prison, and I hope not, because she needs to pay for what she's done.
In the spring of 1828, nearly a year after a young woman named Maria Martin vanished from the English countryside, a man walked across a patch of uneven ground inside an old red-painted barn in the village of Polstead, Suffolk. The barn stood alone against open farmland, weathered by wind and rain, its faded boards creaking softly in the cold rural air. Nothing about it appeared remarkable at first glance. To most villagers, it was simply another agricultural building scattered among the fields of East Anglia. But beneath the floor of that barn, hidden under packed earth and silence, lay the answer to one of the most infamous murder mysteries in British history. The story of the Red Barn murder has survived for nearly 2 centuries, not simply because of the crime itself, but because it seemed to contain every element capable of haunting the public imagination. Deception, seduction, secrecy, a hidden grave, and above all, a dream that appeared to lead directly to a corpse. Long before forensic science became reliable, before police investigations operated with modern methods, before newspapers learned restraint, this case transformed from a rural disappearance into a national obsession. And at the center of it all was a young woman whose life had already been judged harshly long before. Her death. Maria Martin disappeared on the evening of May 18th, 1827. For months afterward, her family received letters claiming she was alive and living happily away from Suffolk. Those letters carried reassurance, explanations, promises. They claimed she had married. They claimed she was safe. Whenever her family wondered why Maria herself never wrote home directly, new excuses appeared. She was ill. Her hand was injured. The mail had failed. Weeks became months, and months stretched toward a full year. Yet despite the letters, something inside the Martin household began to shift. Doubt settled slowly over the family, like fog moving across farmland. The silence surrounding Maria no longer felt temporary. It began to feel permanent. And then came the dreams. According to later testimony, Maria's stepmother, and Martin, began suffering from recurring nightmares. In those dreams, Maria was no longer alive. She appeared dead and buried beneath the floor of the Red Barn. The images returned again and again with such intensity that and eventually became convinced they were more than imagination. In early 19th century England, belief in omens, warnings, and prophetic dreams was not unusual, especially in isolated rural communities where folklore and religion often lived side by side. But even by those standards, Anne's claims disturbed people. She insisted that something terrible had happened to Maria and that the truth could be found inside the barn itself. At first, her fears may have sounded irrational. After all, the family had letters. William Corder, the man Maria had left with, continued to provide explanations. There was no body. No witness had seen a murder take place. There was only absence, uncertainty, and growing suspicion. But the dreams continued, persistent enough that and eventually convinced Maria's father, Thomas Martin, to investigate the barn. On April 19th, 1828, Thomas entered the Red Barn carrying a shovel. The structure had become strangely symbolic by then. Nearly everyone in Polstead knew it. The building's reddish exterior made it recognizable from a distance, and local rumors had already begun circling around it. Yet no one truly expected what would happen next. Thomas began digging into the floor. At first there was only dirt and packed clay. Then the shovel struck something softer beneath the ground. Buried under the earth was a sack containing human remains in an advanced state of decomposition. The body was eventually identified as Maria Martin through fragments of clothing and strands of hair. The young woman who had supposedly been alive for nearly a year had, in reality, never left Suffolk at all. She had been hidden beneath the barn the entire time. News of the discovery spread rapidly through the village and beyond. In an era before telephones or radio, stories still traveled quickly when they carried enough horror. And this story carried more than horror. It carried mystery. Almost immediately, the public became fascinated by one particular detail: the dreams. Newspapers seized upon them. People debated whether Martin possessed supernatural insight or whether she had unconsciously pieced together suspicions that others ignored. Some believed divine intervention had exposed the crime. Others believed the dreams were merely coincidence, shaped afterward into legend. But regardless of explanation, the image was unforgettable. A mother figure dreaming repeatedly of a hidden grave beneath a red barn, only for a body to be discovered exactly where she claimed it would be. The case might have remained a local tragedy if not for the extraordinary narrative surrounding it. Instead, it exploded into one of the most widely discussed criminal cases of 19th century Britain. Crowds became obsessed not only with the murder itself, but with the personalities involved. Maria Martin was young, attractive, and vulnerable in a society that often condemned women more quickly than it protected them. William Corder, the man accused of killing her, seemed to embody a different kind of fear. The charming deceiver capable of blending into respectable society while hiding something deeply violent beneath the surface. By the time investigators began searching for him, the case had already taken on the shape of folklore. Yet beneath the mythology was a real human tragedy. Maria Martin had grown up poor in rural Suffolk, where opportunities for women were painfully limited. Her personal life had already made her the subject of gossip within the village long before her disappearance. She had relationships with multiple men and had given birth to children outside marriage, circumstances that carried enormous social stigma during the 1820s. In many ways, Maria entered adulthood already burdened by public judgment. Women in her position often existed in a dangerous social space, vulnerable to scandal, dependent on men for stability, and punished more harshly than the men involved in the same relationships. When she became involved with William Corder, she may have believed marriage offered a path toward security and legitimacy. Instead, that relationship would lead her toward isolation and eventually death. Corder himself came from a comparatively better position. He was the son of a prosperous farmer and carried a reputation for intelligence mixed with dishonesty. Even before Maria vanished, villagers knew him as a manipulative figure associated with theft, deception, and fraud. He had reportedly earned the nickname Foxy because of his cunning nature. Yet despite these warning signs, Maria trusted him. Perhaps she believed his promises. Perhaps she believed marriage would allow her to escape the shame attached to her reputation. Or perhaps she simply wanted the stability that society denied women who stood alone. Whatever hopes she carried with her on the night she disappeared, they ended inside the Red Barn. The events of May 18th, 1827 would later become central to the investigation. According to the known facts of the case, Corder told Maria to meet him at the barn so the two of them could secretly travel to Ipswich and marry. To avoid recognition, he instructed her to wear men's clothing. That detail alone added another layer of unease to the story. Maria left home expecting a future. Instead, she walked unknowingly toward her own grave. Exactly what happened inside the barn has never been fully reconstructed. Even medical examinations conducted after the body was recovered failed to establish a single definitive cause of death. Evidence suggested multiple possibilities. There were indications of a gunshot wound. There may also have been signs of stabbing or strangulation. A handkerchief belonging to Corder was reportedly found around Maria's neck. The uncertainty surrounding the exact method of killing only deepened public fascination. The murder seemed shadowed by ambiguity from beginning to end. What investigators didn't know was this: after Maria died, her body was concealed beneath the floor of the barn, and William Corder disappeared from Suffolk. But he did not simply vanish. Instead, he carefully constructed the illusion that Maria remained alive. The letters he sent to her family became a central part of the deception. In many ways, those letters prolonged the suffering of the Martins by keeping hope alive just long enough to prevent immediate alarm. They transformed the murder from a single act of violence into an extended manipulation lasting nearly a year. By the time Maria's remains were finally discovered, the emotional damage inflicted on the family had already become profound. And still, the story was only beginning. Once authorities identified William Corder as the primary suspect, the investigation expanded beyond Suffolk and into London, where he had apparently reinvented himself under a new identity. Shockingly, during the period in which Maria lay buried beneath the Red Barn, Corder had managed to build an entirely new life. He had even married another woman after placing an advertisement seeking a wife. The contrast was chilling. While one woman decomposed in a hidden grave, another unknowingly entered into marriage with a man accused of killing her. When police eventually arrested Corder, they reportedly discovered weapons, letters warning him about the body's discovery, and documents suggesting he intended to flee abroad. Yet even after his capture, the public fascination surrounding the case only intensified. The trial drew enormous crowds. Newspapers across Britain covered every detail obsessively. People traveled simply to watch proceedings unfold. The Red Barn murder became more than a criminal investigation. It became public theater. But before the execution, before the courtroom, before the books bound in human skin and the legends that would survive into modern times, there was only a young woman named Maria Martin walking alone toward a barn in the Suffolk countryside, believing she was about to begin a new life. Instead, her disappearance would become one of the darkest and most enduring murder stories in British history. To understand why the murder of Maria Martin shocked England so deeply, it is necessary to understand the world she lived in long before she disappeared. The Red Barn murder was not simply the story of a hidden body or a manipulative killer. It was also the story of class, reputation, morality, and survival in early 19th century rural England. Maria Martin did not live in a society that offered women many second chances. By the time she met William Corder, her name already carried whispers through the village of Polstead, and those whispers mattered. In the England of the 1820s, reputation could shape the course of an entire life, particularly for women. A man accused of dishonesty might still recover socially. A woman accused of sexual impropriety often could not. This imbalance formed the silent backdrop of Maria's life, and ultimately, it shaped the vulnerability that William Corder would exploit. Polstead, the Suffolk village where Maria lived, was small, rural, and deeply tied to agricultural rhythms. Villagers knew one another's routines, histories, arguments, debts, and scandals. Privacy barely existed in such communities. Daily life revolved around labor, religion, and survival. Wealth was unevenly distributed, and social mobility was limited. A person's family background frequently determined how others viewed them for life. For poorer families especially, stability depended on maintaining respectability in the eyes of neighbors. Gossip was not simply entertainment. It could affect employment, marriage prospects, and social standing. In that environment, women faced intense pressure to conform to moral expectations established by both religion and custom. Marriage represented more than romance. It was economic protection, social legitimacy, and survival. Women who became pregnant outside marriage were often judged harshly regardless of circumstance, while the men involved frequently escaped with far fewer consequences. Maria Martin entered adulthood within that unforgiving system. She was born in 1801 into a poor family. Her father worked as a mole catcher, a difficult and modest occupation that reflected the family's limited means. Rural laborers in Suffolk often lived close to poverty, dependent on seasonal work and vulnerable to economic hardship. Maria grew up in that world of uncertainty, where opportunities for advancement were scarce and education limited. Yet despite those circumstances, accounts consistently described her as strikingly attractive and socially engaging. She drew attention easily. In another environment, those qualities might have opened doors. In Polstead, they also attracted scrutiny. Beauty could become both advantage and danger, particularly for a young woman navigating relationships in a judgmental village society. Over time, Maria's personal life became the subject of increasing gossip. Before meeting William Corder, she had relationships with several men and gave birth to children outside marriage. One of those children died young, while another son survived. Modern audiences may view these facts with sympathy or neutrality, but in the social world Maria inhabited, they carried enormous stigma. Women in her position were often treated as morally compromised, regardless of the emotional realities behind their circumstances. The details of her relationships became woven into her reputation until many villagers saw her less as a person and more as a cautionary story. It is important, however, not to mistake public judgment for truth. The surviving descriptions of Maria frequently reflect the biases of the era. She was discussed as scandalous because society expected women to bear the burden of moral purity, almost entirely alone. Yet beneath the gossip was a young woman attempting to navigate limited choices in a deeply unequal world. Having children outside marriage could place women in severe economic and social danger. Employment became harder to secure. Marriage prospects narrowed. Dependence on unreliable partners increased. In many cases, women remained emotionally and financially vulnerable to the men who promised them stability. Maria's story reflects that reality repeatedly. By the mid-1820s, she was already living under the weight of social scrutiny when William Corder entered her life. On paper, Corder appeared to represent opportunity. He came from a family more prosperous than the Martins. His father was a relatively successful farmer, and compared to many villagers, William occupied a more comfortable social position. He was also educated to a degree uncommon in rural communities. But alongside those advantages came a darker reputation that had followed him for years. Long before Maria disappeared, people in Polstead knew William Corder as a dishonest and manipulative figure. He had reportedly been associated with theft, deception, fraud, and forged documents. His tendency toward cunning behavior earned him the nickname Foxy, a name that suggested villagers viewed him as clever but fundamentally untrustworthy. Even so, charisma and intelligence can often conceal dangerous qualities, especially in close-knit communities where outward respectability still carried power. Corder appears to have possessed exactly that ability. He moved between identities with ease, presenting himself differently depending on circumstance. To some, he may have seemed charming. to others suspicious. But Maria trusted him enough to build a future around him. Their relationship developed during a period when Maria's social and emotional position was already precarious. Eventually, she became pregnant by Corder. Under the standards of the time, this intensified pressure surrounding the relationship dramatically. Marriage was no longer simply desirable. It became socially urgent. For Maria, marriage to Corder likely represented the possibility of legitimacy, protection, and a more stable future for herself and her child. Without it, she risked even greater social isolation. But while Maria appeared to move toward commitment, Corder seems to have moved in the opposite direction. The more pressure that surrounded the expectation of marriage, the more trapped he may have felt. Unlike Maria, whose survival partly depended on social acceptance, Corder possessed greater freedom to leave, disappear, or reinvent himself. And throughout his life, he repeatedly demonstrated a willingness to manipulate situations in his favor rather than confront consequences directly. This imbalance between them became central to the tragedy that followed. Maria needed certainty. Corder sought escape. Understanding this tension is crucial because the Red Barn murder did not emerge suddenly from nowhere. It developed within a relationship shaped by unequal power, social fear, and conflicting motivations. Maria's pregnancy placed urgency on the future. For her, time mattered. Each passing month without marriage threatened further scandal and instability. For Corder, the same circumstances may have represented growing danger to his reputation and freedom. In rural England during the 1820s, scandal could spread rapidly. Public shame carried real consequences, especially within small communities where everyone knew one another. A forced marriage, financial obligations, or public exposure may have felt increasingly intolerable to him. None of this excuses what happened. Rather, it reveals how social conditions and personal character combined to create a situation moving steadily toward disaster. What makes the story particularly haunting is that Maria appears to have continued believing in the possibility of a future with Corder despite his reputation. That belief may seem difficult to understand from a modern perspective, but emotional dependence often survives alongside warning signs. Promises of marriage carried enormous weight for women in Maria's position. If Corder reassured her repeatedly, if he presented himself as committed despite delays or complications, she may have clung to those promises because the alternatives were frightening. In societies where women possessed limited independence, trust in male partners could become less about romance and more about survival. Maria's vulnerability did not come from weakness of character. It came from existing within a system that gave women very few safe options once their reputations were damaged. As tensions within the relationship grew, the Red Barn itself slowly entered the story. The structure already existed as a recognizable local landmark before the murder. Painted partially red, it stood out visually against the surrounding countryside. Villagers knew it well. Yet before May 1827, it held no sinister significance. It was simply another agricultural building among fields and farms. That ordinariness would later become part of the horror. Murder did not occur in some distant Gothic castle or hidden forest. It happened in a familiar place visible to the community itself. The evil hidden beneath the Red Barn floor existed in plain sight for nearly a year, while every day life continued around it. In hindsight, the entire story seems filled with tragic inevitability, but for Maria, the future likely still appeared uncertain rather than doomed. When she looked toward William Corder, she may have seen resolution. She may have imagined escape from gossip, a legitimate marriage, perhaps even a chance to rebuild her standing within society. There's a painful contrast between the hopes Maria probably carried and the role history ultimately assigned to her. Over time, the Red Barn murder became sensationalized through newspapers, plays, ballads, and folklore. William Corder evolved into the archetype of the charming killer, and Martin became associated with prophetic dreams. The barn itself became a national symbol of hidden violence. Yet Maria, the person at the center of the tragedy, was often reduced to either scandal or victimhood. What sometimes disappears beneath the mythology is the reality that she was a living woman trapped inside social conditions that offered little protection. Her mistakes became public identity. Her vulnerability became spectacle. And eventually, her death became legend. Before the murder, before the trial, before the crowds gathered to watch William Corder stand in court, Maria Martin was simply a young woman in rural Suffolk trying to secure stability in a world that judged her relentlessly. That human reality matters because it reframes the entire case. The Red Barn murder was not only about violence hidden beneath a barn floor. It was also about how easily vulnerable people can be manipulated when society leaves them dependent on those willing to exploit them. By the spring of 1827, Maria Martin stood at the center of that danger, although she likely did not yet realize it. Somewhere ahead waited a meeting at the Red Barn, a promise of marriage, and a journey she believed would finally change her life. Instead, it would end it. By the evening of May 18, 1827, the relationship between Maria Martin and William Corder had reached a point where uncertainty could no longer continue indefinitely. Maria was pregnant again, and in the rigid moral landscape of rural England, every passing week without marriage deepened the danger surrounding her reputation. Whatever private conversations had taken place between them in the months leading up to that night, one fact remained clear: Maria believed William Corder still intended to marry her. Whether she trusted him completely or simply clung to the possibility because she had few alternatives is impossible to know. But on that evening, she prepared to leave home, believing she was stepping toward a future rather than toward death. According to the later reconstruction of events, Corder had instructed Maria to meet him at the Red Barn before they traveled together to Ipswich, where they would secretly marry. The secrecy itself was not entirely unusual within the context of the time. Couples sometimes eloped to avoid family conflict, social embarrassment, or legal complications. But there was one detail that stood out even then. Corder reportedly told Maria to disguise herself in men's clothing before making the journey. On the surface, the explanation may have sounded practical. Suffolk villages were small places where people noticed movement quickly. If Maria traveled openly at night with a man, questions might follow. A disguise offered concealment. Yet with the benefit of hindsight, the request feels deeply unsettling. It transformed Maria into someone hidden, someone partially erased before she even arrived at the barn. In many ways, that disguise symbolized the entire crime that followed. Concealment layered upon concealment until a human life disappeared beneath secrecy itself. The precise emotional state Maria carried that evening cannot be reconstructed with certainty, and it is important not to invent feelings unsupported by evidence. But the known circumstances suggest a woman standing at a crossroads. She had already endured public judgment, unstable relationships, and the burden of scandal within her community. Marriage to Corder may have appeared to offer an escape from that instability. She may have imagined beginning again in another town where gossip from Polstead could not follow her so easily. Perhaps she believed that secrecy was temporary, that once they were married, respectability and legitimacy would finally replace shame. Whatever doubts she may have harbored about Corder's character, she still agreed to meet him. That decision would become the final known choice of her life. As daylight faded over Suffolk, Maria left her family home. The English countryside in late spring carried a deceptive calm. Fields stretched quietly beneath the evening sky while narrow dirt roads connected isolated farms, and barns scattered across the landscape. There were no electric lights, no passing automobiles, no crowded streets. Rural England after dark could feel profoundly isolated. A person walking alone at night moved through silence broken only by wind, distant animals, or footsteps against packed earth. Somewhere within that quiet landscape stood the red barn waiting ahead. The structure itself had already existed for years as part of ordinary agricultural life. Its reddish exterior made it recognizable within the community, but before the murder, it carried no special significance. It was not haunted. It was not infamous. It was simply familiar. That familiarity may have made it easier for Maria to trust the meeting place. A known location felt safer than somewhere hidden entirely from public view. Yet familiarity can also disguise danger. The barn stood isolated enough to provide privacy, while remaining ordinary enough not to arouse immediate suspicion. At some point that evening, Maria arrived there expecting to meet the man she believed would become her husband. What happened next has never been fully known. No eyewitnesses observed the killing itself. No surviving confession clarified every detail. The only certainty came later, when Maria's body was discovered buried beneath the barn floor. Even then, the exact method of murder remained unclear. Early 19th century forensic science lacked the sophistication necessary to establish definitive conclusions from heavily decomposed remains. Medical examinations conducted after the body's recovery produced conflicting interpretations. Evidence suggested Maria may have been shot. There were also possible indications of stabbing or strangulation. A handkerchief belonging to William Corder was reportedly found around her neck, adding another layer of suspicion but not complete clarity. The uncertainty surrounding the precise cause of death created an eerie absence at the center of the case. It was as though the violence itself resisted full reconstruction, leaving investigators and the public to imagine fragments rather than a complete sequence of events. Still, despite the ambiguity, certain realities emerged unmistakably. Maria Martin entered the Red Barn alive and never emerged again. Her body was hidden beneath the floor. William Corder disappeared shortly afterward. Those facts formed the core truth beneath all later speculation. If the murder itself remains partially obscured by time, the concealment afterward reveals something colder and more deliberate. Burying a body beneath the floor of a barn required intention. It required time, effort, and calculation. This was not a panicked attempt to flee from sudden tragedy. It was an effort to erase evidence entirely. Maria's remains were reportedly placed inside a sack and hidden under the earth beneath the barn floorboards. Above that grave, ordinary life continued. Villagers passed nearby unaware that a murdered woman lay beneath their feet. Seasons changed over the hidden burial site. Rain fell across the Suffolk countryside. Harvests came and went. All the while, Maria remained there in darkness while the man accused of killing her constructed a new life elsewhere. What makes this stage of the story particularly chilling is how effectively William Corder controlled the narrative immediately after Maria vanished. In small rural communities, disappearances could not easily remain unexplained. Someone leaving suddenly would attract questions. Corder appeared to understand this immediately, and instead of disappearing silently, he replaced Maria's physical absence with carefully crafted reassurance. He claimed that the two of them had left together and married. More importantly, he maintained that illusion for months. After the murder, Corder left Suffolk and eventually traveled toward London. But before fully severing ties with Polstead, he continued communicating with the Martin family through letters. Those letters became one of the most psychologically disturbing aspects of the entire case because they prolonged uncertainty rather than closure. They trapped the family between hope and suspicion. According to later accounts, the letters insisted Maria was alive and doing well. Whenever her family questioned why Maria herself never wrote directly, excuses followed. She was sick. She had injured her hand. Circumstances prevented her from corresponding personally. In the modern world, prolonged silence from a loved one often creates immediate alarm because communication is expected constantly. But in the 1820s, distance functioned differently. Letters traveled slowly and irregularly. People disappeared into other towns for work or marriage with limited contact. Corder exploited those realities skillfully. His deception succeeded not because it was flawless, but because the social conditions of the time made uncertainty easier to maintain. For the Martin family, the emotional consequences must have been agonizing. Maria was absent, yet not definitively gone. Her father and stepmother received just enough reassurance to delay panic while never receiving enough direct contact to feel truly secure. This type of manipulation created a psychological limbo. Hope remained alive, but uneasily so. Every letter simultaneously comforted and disturbed. Over time, silence itself became suspicious. Yet without proof of violence, what could the family truly do? It is here that the emotional cruelty of the crime becomes especially visible. The murder did not end with Maria's death beneath the barn. It continued through the months-long performance that followed. Corder effectively forced the Martins to participate unknowingly in the concealment of their daughter's death. Each new letter prolonged the illusion. Each excuse extended uncertainty. The family mourned without permission to fully grieve because they lacked confirmation of loss. Meanwhile, William Corder moved farther away from Suffolk and deeper into reinvention. One of the most haunting aspects of the Red Barn murder is the contrast between hidden death and visible normalcy. While Maria decomposed beneath packed earth in the Suffolk countryside, Corder reportedly continued building a new existence elsewhere almost immediately. The separation between the violence of the crime and the ordinary appearance of daily life afterward disturbed the public deeply once the truth emerged. People wanted killers to look monstrous, unstable, obviously dangerous. But Corder appeared capable of blending into society, writing calm letters, maintaining appearances, and planning for the future while concealing murder behind polite explanations. That contradiction transformed him into a figure of national fascination later during the trial. Yet at this stage of the story, none of that notoriety existed yet. There was only absence. Maria Martin vanished from public life so completely that even those closest to her struggled to determine whether she was alive. In Polstead, rumors likely circulated quietly through the village, as they always did in small communities. Some people may have believed Maria truly left with Corder. Others may have doubted the story privately. But suspicion without evidence rarely becomes certainty. The Red Barn itself remained standing peacefully among the fields, giving no visible sign of what lay beneath it. Time passed. Weeks became months. Summer turned to winter. The hidden grave remained undiscovered. And somewhere within the Martin household, unease slowly hardened into fear. The finality of Maria's death remained concealed from the world, but emotionally, something had already begun to shift. The explanations from William Corder no longer felt entirely convincing. The silence surrounding Maria had become too large, too unnatural, too prolonged. Soon, that growing dread would collide with the dreams of and Martin, leading investigators back toward the Red Barn itself. But before the body was found, before the arrest, before the trial transformed the case into national spectacle, there was simply the terrible quiet that follows disappearance. A young woman walked into a barn expecting marriage and never came home again. For nearly a year after Maria Martin disappeared, the truth remained buried beneath the floor of the Red Barn, while William Corder carefully maintained the illusion that she was still alive. In many murder cases, investigators begin with a body, a crime scene, or at least an obvious sign of violence. The Red Barn murder unfolded differently. The investigation began not with certainty, but with absence. Maria had vanished without witnesses, without public struggle, and without immediate proof that any crime had occurred at all. What existed instead were letters, excuses, and a growing sense within the Martin household that something was terribly wrong. The months following Maria's disappearance created a strange, emotional contradiction for her family. Officially, she was alive somewhere away from Suffolk with William Corder. Unofficially, silence surrounded her. The letters sent by Corder formed the foundation of the deception. They claimed Maria was healthy, married, and settled elsewhere. Whenever concerns emerged about why Maria herself never wrote directly, explanations followed quickly. She was reportedly ill. At other times, her hand was supposedly injured, preventing her from writing. Delays in correspondence were blamed on practical difficulties. In the early 19th century, these excuses carried a degree of plausibility that might seem unusual today. Communication moved slowly. Travel separated families for long periods. People disappeared into new towns and rebuilt their lives with limited contact. There were no telephones, no photographs exchanged instantly, no efficient systems for verifying identity or location. Corder exploited those realities with patience and precision. His letters were not simply lies. They were tools designed to manage suspicion carefully enough to prevent immediate investigation. And for a time, they worked. Yet deception rarely eliminates anxiety entirely. Inside the Martin household, uncertainty gradually transformed into unease. Maria's absence no longer felt temporary. Every new letter from Corder may have provided brief reassurance, but the reassurances themselves became repetitive and strangely hollow. Families recognize emotional patterns long before they can explain them logically. Something about Maria's disappearance did not feel natural. The longer she remained unseen, the heavier that silence became. At the center of that growing suspicion stood Martin, Maria's stepmother. In later retellings of the case, and often became one of its most mysterious figures because of the dreams she claimed to experience. According to her testimony, she repeatedly dreamed that Maria had been murdered and buried beneath the floor of the Red Barn. Those dreams would eventually become one of the most famous aspects of the entire story, transforming the case from rural homicide into enduring folklore. But before the dreams became legend, they emerged within the emotional reality of a grieving household trapped between hope and dread. It is important to approach this part of the case carefully because the dreams have often overshadowed the human tragedy beneath them. And Martin stated that the visions returned repeatedly with disturbing consistency. She reportedly saw Maria dead beneath the barn floor and became increasingly convinced that the dreams reflected reality rather than imagination. In modern discussions, explanations vary widely. Some interpret the dreams through the lens of superstition or spiritual belief. Others suggest and subconsciously piece together suspicions based on inconsistencies in Corder's behavior and the prolonged silence surrounding Maria. Still others have proposed that rumors circulating within the village may have influenced her fears. Before the body was discovered, there were even later unproven rumors suggesting and herself possessed some undisclosed knowledge about Corder, though no evidence ever substantiated such claims. What matters most historically is not whether the dreams were supernatural, but that and believed them strongly enough to act. In rural England during the 1820s, dreams and omens often carried cultural significance. Communities frequently blended religious faith with folk beliefs about warnings, intuition, and signs from the dead. Ann's insistence that Maria was buried beneath the Red Barn may initially have sounded irrational to some members of the household, but repeated conviction eventually overcame hesitation. The emotional pressure inside the family had already been building for months. The dreams gave shape to fears that previously lacked direction. Finally, Ann persuaded Maria's father, Thomas Martin, to investigate the barn directly. On April 19, 1828, nearly a year after Maria vanished, Thomas entered the Red Barn carrying a shovel. The moment has since become one of the most iconic scenes in British criminal history because of what it represented: the collision between uncertainty and truth. Up until that point, Maria existed in a suspended state between life and death in the minds of those around her. The barn excavation would end that ambiguity forever. Contemporary retellings often dramatize the scene heavily, but the known facts themselves are disturbing enough without embellishment. Thomas began digging into the barn floor where and believed Maria had been buried. At first, there was only packed earth beneath the structure. Then the digging uncovered something hidden below the surface. Buried beneath the floorboards was a sack containing decomposed human remains. Identification proved possible through fragments of clothing and portions of Maria's hair. The discovery confirmed the family's worst fears instantly. Maria had never left Suffolk. She had never married William Corder. She had been dead for months beneath the very building everyone in the village recognized by sight. The emotional devastation of that discovery is difficult to fully reconstruct. For nearly a year, the Martin family had lived inside uncertainty. Now, uncertainty disappeared all at once, replaced by violent finality. Any lingering hope created by Corder's letters collapsed immediately. The truth hidden beneath the Red Barn floor transformed not only the family's understanding of Maria's fate, but also the entire nature of the case. What had seemed like a mysterious disappearance became unmistakably a murder investigation. News spread rapidly through Polstead and far beyond Suffolk. In 19th century Britain, sensational crimes traveled quickly through newspapers hungry for dramatic material. The Red Barn murder contained elements almost designed for public obsession. A beautiful young woman, a deceptive lover, a secret burial, and most strikingly, prophetic dreams leading to the discovery of the body. The press seized upon those details immediately. The dreams became central to newspaper coverage because they blurred the line between criminal investigation and supernatural mystery. Readers across England became fascinated by the possibility that a hidden murder had been exposed, through visions rather than evidence alone. But alongside the folklore, practical investigation now intensified. Once Maria's remains were identified, suspicion centered overwhelmingly on William Corder. His behavior after Maria's disappearance suddenly appeared deeply incriminating. The letters that once reassured the family now looked like deliberate manipulation intended to conceal murder. Investigators began tracing his movements after he left Suffolk. The search expanded beyond local inquiry into a broader manhunt. Authorities soon discovered that Corder had relocated to London under a different identity. Even more shocking was the life he appeared to be building there, while Maria's body remained hidden beneath the Red Barn. During the months after the murder, Corder had reportedly advertised for a wife through a newspaper and successfully married another woman. That revelation horrified the public once it became known. The image of a man calmly entering a new marriage while concealing the murder of his former lover intensified the perception of Corder as cold, manipulative, and morally detached. The contrast between Maria's hidden grave and Corder's outwardly normal new life became one of the defining psychological elements of the case. Investigators eventually located and arrested him in London. During searches connected to the arrest, authorities reportedly discovered several items that strengthened the prosecution's case significantly. Among them was a pistol believed to be connected to the murder. There were also letters warning Corder that Maria's body had been discovered, suggesting awareness of guilt rather than surprise. Additionally, officials found documents indicating preparations to flee abroad, raising further suspicion that he intended to escape prosecution entirely. While none of these items alone reconstructed the murder in complete detail, together they formed a powerful pattern: disappearance, deception, concealment, false identity, and apparent plans for escape. The investigation into the Red Barn murder unfolded during a period when criminal detection methods remained relatively primitive compared to modern standards. There were no fingerprints, DNA tests, or sophisticated forensic reconstructions. Cases often depended heavily on witness testimony, circumstantial evidence, and public interpretation of character. In that environment, behavior itself became evidence. Corder's letters, relocation, assumed identity, an apparent attempt to build a new life all contributed to the growing perception of guilt. At the same time, the ambiguity surrounding Maria's exact cause of death complicated matters. Medical experts examining the remains could not agree definitively on whether she had been shot, stabbed, or strangled. The decomposition of the body limited certainty. This forensic uncertainty would later shape the legal strategy during the trial itself. But before the courtroom proceedings began, the investigation had already achieved something extraordinary for its time. A hidden murder buried beneath rural earth for nearly a year had been uncovered through a combination of suspicion, persistence, and what many believed were prophetic dreams. Public fascination exploded accordingly. Newspapers turned the case into serialized drama. Crowds discussed it obsessively. Rumors multiplied. The Red Barn itself became a place of morbid curiosity. What made the story so powerful was not only the violence of the crime, but the unsettling psychological dimensions surrounding it. William Corder had not merely killed Maria Martin. He had attempted to erase her completely while continuing ordinary life elsewhere. The investigation revealed not only hidden death, but hidden performance. For months, he maintained the illusion of normalcy through carefully crafted correspondence. That ability to separate outward calm from concealed violence disturbed people deeply. In many ways, the case reflected broader anxieties emerging in 19th century society. Fears about deception, identity, and the possibility that evil could exist beneath respectable appearances. By the time authorities prepared to bring William Corder to trial, the Red Barn murder had already become one of the most discussed criminal cases in Britain. Yet for all the sensationalism surrounding dreams, rumors, and newspaper stories, the essential tragedy remained painfully simple. A young woman had trusted someone who saw her not as a future wife, but as a problem to be removed. And beneath the mythology growing around the case, Maria Martin herself remained where she had been from the beginning, at the center of a crime that transformed human suffering into national spectacle. By the summer of 1828, the Red Barn murder had evolved from a rural homicide into a national obsession. Long before William Corder entered the courtroom, newspapers across Britain had already transformed the case into public spectacle. The discovery of Maria Martin's body beneath the barn floor, combined with the sensational story of Martin's dreams, created the kind of narrative that 19th century audiences found irresistible. Crowds followed every development closely. Rumors spread faster than verified facts. In villages, taverns, city streets, and homes across England, people discussed the same questions repeatedly. Had William Corder planned the murder from the beginning? Did Martin truly foresee the location of the body? And perhaps most disturbing of all, how had a man managed to hide such a crime for nearly a year while continuing to live an apparently ordinary life? By the time Corder's trial began in August 1828 at Bury St. Edmunds, Public fascination had reached extraordinary levels. The proceedings no longer concerned only guilt or innocence. They had become a form of national theater. The town itself struggled to contain the crowds arriving to witness the case firsthand. Thousands gathered outside the courthouse, filling streets and surrounding public spaces. Inns became overcrowded. Vendors sold printed accounts of the murder. Newspapers published exhaustive coverage because readers demanded every possible detail. Criminal trials during the 19th century often attracted public interest. But the Red Barn murder occupied a different category entirely. It combined violence, deception, romance, morality, mystery, and folklore into a single narrative. The trial represented not merely legal judgment, but the climax of a story the public already felt emotionally invested in. Yet beneath the spectacle stood a harsher reality. Maria Martin herself was no longer present to speak. The courtroom centered overwhelmingly on William Corder, his behavior, his lies, his explanations, and ultimately his fate. This imbalance reflected a broader pattern common in famous murder cases, both historical and modern. Public attention often gravitates toward the accused while the victim gradually becomes secondary to the drama surrounding the perpetrator. Even in death, Maria risked becoming overshadowed by the man who killed her. The legal case against Corder faced an important challenge from the beginning. Although investigators possessed strong circumstantial evidence, the exact cause of Maria's death remained uncertain because of the condition of her remains when discovered. Medical experts examining the body could not conclusively determine whether she had been shot, stabbed, strangled, or killed through some combination of violence. This forensic ambiguity created a potential legal weakness. In early 19th century criminal law, technical inconsistencies could sometimes allow defendants to escape conviction. Prosecutors understood that uncertainty regarding the precise method of murder might create opportunities for reasonable doubt if the indictment relied on only one theory of death. To address this problem, the prosecution adopted a strategy designed to eliminate those loopholes. Rather than accusing Corder through a single explanation alone, prosecutors reportedly included multiple forms of murder in the charges against him. He was accused of shooting Maria, stabbing her, and strangling her. The reasoning behind this approach was practical rather than sensational. If evidence failed to conclusively prove one method, another might still support conviction. The prosecution's objective was to ensure that uncertainty surrounding forensic details would not overshadow the larger body of evidence pointing toward deliberate murder. For 19th century audiences, the legal complexity added another layer of fascination to the case. The courtroom itself became a stage upon which competing narratives unfolded. On one side stood the image of Maria Martin as a deceived and murdered woman buried secretly beneath the Red Barn. On the other stood William Corder, a man whose intelligence and manipulative behavior had already become central to public perception of the crime. Reports from the trial emphasized the intense scrutiny directed toward Corder throughout the proceedings. Observers watched his demeanor carefully, searching his expressions and reactions for signs of guilt, remorse, or coldness. Public trials during this era often encouraged moral interpretation alongside legal judgment. Defendants were not evaluated solely through evidence, but also through perceived character. Corder's reputation prior to the murder worked heavily against him. Stories of fraud, deception, and dishonesty circulated widely. The nickname Foxy, associated with cunning behavior, reinforced the image of a manipulative man capable of calculated violence. By the time he stood trial, much of the public had already reached conclusions about his character. Still, legal proceedings required evidence beyond reputation alone. The prosecution presented a chain of circumstances that collectively painted a deeply incriminating picture. Maria Martin disappeared after arranging to meet Corder at the Red Barn. Her body was later found buried beneath the barn floor. Corder had fled Suffolk afterward and lived under another identity in London. He continued sending letters falsely claiming Maria remained alive and married to him. Investigators reportedly discovered weapons, warning letters about the body's discovery, and indications that he planned to flee abroad. None of these elements existed in isolation. Together, they suggested deliberate concealment before and after the crime. Perhaps most damaging of all was the sustained deception through correspondence. The letters to the Martin family demonstrated prolonged manipulation extending far beyond the moment of death itself. They showed not panic, but calculation. The defense faced enormous difficulty overcoming that pattern of behavior. Initially, William Corder denied responsibility for Maria's death. According to reports from the trial, he eventually claimed that Maria's death resulted from an accidental shooting during an argument between them. This explanation represented a significant change because it acknowledged involvement while attempting to reduce moral and legal responsibility. Instead of premeditated murder, Corder attempted to frame the death as unintended tragedy followed by fear-driven concealment. Yet even this account raised serious problems. If the shooting had truly been accidental, why bury the body secretly beneath the barn floor? Why flee Suffolk under a false identity? Why send deceptive letters for nearly a year pretending Maria remained alive? Why prepare documents suggesting escape abroad? The contradiction between Corder's explanation and his subsequent actions undermined his credibility severely. His story required the jury to believe that a man who accidentally killed his lover responded not by reporting the death, but by orchestrating an elaborate deception spanning months. The prosecution emphasized these inconsistencies relentlessly. In many ways, the trial reflected growing tensions within 19th century society regarding criminal identity. Earlier eras often imagined murderers as visibly monstrous or socially isolated individuals. But cases like the Red Barn murder challenged that assumption. William Corder did not appear outwardly monstrous. He had moved through society successfully, formed relationships, written persuasive letters, and even remarried after Maria's disappearance. The disturbing implication was that violence could exist beneath ordinary appearances. This idea fascinated and frightened the public simultaneously. It also contributed heavily to the enduring legacy of the case. Crowds attending the trial were not simply witnessing legal proceedings. They were confronting anxieties about deception itself. Throughout the proceedings, Maria Martin's absence remained emotionally central despite her physical absence from the courtroom. Evidence concerning the discovery of her body beneath the Red Barn floor carried immense emotional weight. The image of a young woman buried secretly while her killer pretended she was alive resonated powerfully with jurors and spectators alike. Even the uncertainty surrounding the exact cause of death may have intensified rather than weakened. The horror, the violence seemed chaotic, hidden, and partially unknowable. Maria had effectively vanished from society while William Corder attempted to erase the crime through performance and manipulation. Ultimately, the jury rejected Corder's explanations and found him guilty of intentional murder. The verdict confirmed what much of the public already believed long before the trial concluded. Yet the formal declaration of guilt still carried enormous symbolic significance. It transformed suspicion into legal certainty. The man associated with one of the most infamous crimes in Britain now stood officially condemned. Public reaction to the conviction reflected both outrage and fascination. For many observers, justice seemed inevitable. Others remained captivated by the broader mythology surrounding the case, particularly the dreams that led investigators back to the barn. The legal proceedings had answered some questions while leaving others unresolved forever. No courtroom testimony could fully reconstruct Maria's final moments inside the Red Barn. No verdict could erase the months during which her family lived inside uncertainty manipulated by false hope. And no punishment could reverse the transformation of a human tragedy into national spectacle. Following the conviction, William Corder received the sentence expected for murder in early 19th century England: death by hanging. The execution took place on August 11th, 1828. Public executions during this period attracted enormous crowds, functioning simultaneously as punishment, spectacle, and moral theater. Thousands reportedly gathered to witness Corder's death. People traveled significant distances simply to watch the final act of the Red Barn murder unfold. The atmosphere surrounding public executions often combined grim seriousness with unsettling curiosity. Authorities intended such events to demonstrate the consequences of crime publicly. Yet crowds frequently approached them with fascination bordering on entertainment. The execution of William Corder reflected that contradiction fully. The man whose deception and violence had dominated national conversation for months now faced death before a massive audience. Contemporary accounts suggest extraordinary public interest surrounded every stage of the event. Even after conviction, Corder remained a figure people could not stop watching. And yet, amid the crowds, newspaper reports, and public obsession, the original human tragedy remained painfully unchanged. Maria Martin was still dead. A young woman who entered the Red Barn believing she was beginning a new chapter of life instead became the center of one of Britain's most infamous murder cases. The courtroom had delivered legal closure, but emotional closure proved more complicated. The Red Barn murder had already passed beyond ordinary crime into legend. And in the years that followed, the story would continue evolving far beyond the execution itself, shaping British popular culture for generations. The execution of William Corder on August 11th, 1828, did not bring an end to the Red Barn murder. In many ways, it marked the beginning of the story's second life, the transformation of a brutal crime into one of the most enduring legends in British criminal history. Most murder cases eventually fade from public memory after the trial concludes and the sentence is carried out. The Red Barn murder moved in the opposite direction. The more time passed, the more deeply the case embedded itself into English culture. Newspapers, stage plays, ballads, pamphlets, and later films would preserve the story for generations. The names Maria Martin and William Corder became symbols far larger than the individuals themselves. Yet the persistence of the case raises an unsettling question. Why did this particular murder refuse to disappear? Part of the answer lies in how 19th century society treated crime not only as tragedy, but also as spectacle. Public fascination did not end when Corder died because the culture surrounding punishment in early Victorian England encouraged continued exposure to criminal narratives. Executions themselves were public events attended by enormous crowds. Punishment was designed to be visible, theatrical, and memorable. In Corder's case, the aftermath extended even beyond death. According to practices common at the time for executed murderers, his body underwent public anatomical dissection. Authorities believed post-mortem dissection added an additional layer of punishment beyond execution itself. The criminal body became an object through which society demonstrated moral authority, scientific curiosity, and public warning simultaneously. But even by the standards of the era, what happened to William Corder afterward remained particularly disturbing. His skeleton was reportedly preserved and displayed for years. Even more infamous was the decision to use portions of his skin to bind books documenting the murder and trial. This practice, known as anthropodermic bibliophagy, existed rarely but symbolized the extreme ways 19th century culture blurred the line between justice and morbid fascination. The idea that a murderer's skin could literally become part of the story about his crime captured public imagination immediately. It transformed Corder himself into an artifact of the murder. Some of those books reportedly still exist in museum collections in Suffolk today, long after everyone directly involved in the case has vanished into history. These details often dominate modern retellings because they feel grotesque and surreal. But they also reveal something important about the society consuming the story. The Red Barn murder thrived culturally because it satisfied multiple emotional appetites at once. It offered horror, mystery, morality, romance, violence, and supernatural suggestion all within a single narrative. For Victorian audiences especially, it carried the structure of Gothic fiction while remaining terrifyingly real. The isolated barn, the secret burial, the deceptive lover, the prophetic dreams, the courtroom drama, every element reinforced the others until the case became almost mythological. Yet beneath all the folklore and spectacle remained a much quieter truth: Maria Martin herself. Over time, famous crimes often distort victims into symbols rather than people. Maria was no exception. During her life, she'd been judged harshly because of her relationships, pregnancies outside marriage, and perceived moral failures according to the standards of her era. Much of the early public discussion surrounding her reflected those prejudices. But after her murder, society gradually transformed her into something else entirely. The tragic innocent destroyed by manipulation and deceit. Both versions simplified her humanity. The real Maria Martin existed somewhere between those extremes. Neither scandalous stereotype nor romanticized martyr, but a vulnerable young woman trying to survive within social conditions that offered her limited protection. One of the most revealing aspects of the Red Barn murder is how differently history remembered Maria. And William. Corder became the central figure of endless retellings because society often gravitates toward charismatic or manipulative killers. His lies, his double life, his calculated letters, and his ability to appear ordinary while hiding violence fascinated audiences. Meanwhile, Maria risked becoming secondary within her own story. This imbalance continues to appear in modern true crime culture, where perpetrators sometimes receive more psychological attention than victims themselves. Yet when stripped of mythology, the core tragedy remains profoundly simple. Maria Martin trusted a man who saw her existence as a problem rather than a partner. Her death reflected not only individual cruelty, but also the dangers faced by women whose economic and social security depended heavily on male promises in 19th century society. In many ways, Maria's vulnerability was shaped long before she entered the Red Barn. The social world around her offered little forgiveness for women marked by scandal. Marriage represented legitimacy, stability, and survival. That pressure made deception easier for someone like William Corder to exploit. He understood how desperately Maria needed certainty, and he used that need against her. This broader social context helps explain why the case resonated so deeply with the public. The murder touched anxieties already present within English society: fears about seduction, dishonor, hidden violence, and the fragility of female security in a patriarchal culture. The Red Barn itself soon became a place of obsession. Visitors traveled to see it long after the murder became national news. People reportedly removed pieces of wood from the structure as souvenirs, eager to possess fragments of the infamous site. Even Maria's grave suffered damage from visitors who chipped away pieces as morbid keepsakes. These behaviors may appear shocking today, but they reflected a growing 19th century fascination with crime tourism and relic collecting. Murder scenes became destinations. Objects associated with notorious crimes acquired symbolic value. The Red Barn transformed from an ordinary agricultural building into a physical monument to horror. Eventually, the structure itself disappeared, but the legend surrounding it only expanded further. As decades passed, the story moved beyond newspapers and entered popular entertainment. The Red Barn murder inspired stage plays performed repeatedly across Britain. Traveling productions dramatized Maria's death and the discovery of her body for paying audiences. Eager to experience the story emotionally, folk ballads circulated through communities, preserving the case through music and oral storytelling. Later adaptations extended into radio programs and film. One of the best-known cinematic versions, Maria Martin, or The Murder in the Red Barn, helped cement the story's place within British cultural memory. Each retelling emphasized slightly different aspects of the case. Some focused on romance and betrayal. Others highlighted supernatural elements surrounding and Martin's dreams. Still others treated the murder primarily as moral warning. Over time, the boundary between documented fact and dramatic interpretation blurred increasingly. That process often happens when crimes evolve into folklore. Historical details become simplified into symbols and archetypes. William Corder became the charming killer. Maria became the doomed young woman. The Red Barn became the haunted murder site. Yet reality was always more complicated and more human than legend allowed. Even the dreams themselves remain open to interpretation nearly 2 centuries later. Did and Martin truly experience visions pointing toward the burial site? Did subconscious suspicion shape her dreams after months of emotional tension? Had village rumors unconsciously influenced her fears? No definitive answer exists. The uncertainty surrounding the dreams is precisely what allowed them to endure culturally. They transformed the case from straightforward murder into mystery. Human beings are drawn instinctively towards stories that seem to exist on the edge between rational explanation and something darker, stranger, or unknowable. The Red Barn murder occupied that space perfectly. But perhaps the deepest reason the case survived lies not in the dreams or even the violence itself, but in the disturbing psychological contradiction at its center. William Corder managed to hide murder beneath ordinary life. After killing Maria, he wrote polite letters, adopted a new identity, married another woman, and continued functioning socially while the body remained buried beneath the barn floor. That duality unsettled people profoundly because it challenged comforting assumptions about evil. Society prefers villains who appear visibly monstrous. Corder instead represented something far more frightening: the possibility that deception can wear a normal face. This fear remains deeply modern, which may explain why the Red Barn murder still feels psychologically recognizable today despite occurring in 1827. The case speaks to enduring anxieties about manipulation, trust, and hidden violence concealed behind familiar appearances. Looking back now, nearly 200 years later, the Suffolk countryside where these events unfolded appears quiet again. The original Red Barn no longer stands. The crowds that gathered for the trial and execution are gone. The newspapers that sensationalized every development have faded into archives. Yet the story persists because it reflects more than one isolated crime. It reveals how societies transform tragedy into narrative, how public fascination can blur compassion, and how vulnerable individuals are often judged more harshly than those who exploit them. Maria Martin entered history unwillingly. She did not choose to become part of folklore, theater, or true crime legend. She was a young woman seeking stability within a world that offered her few safe paths forward. The promises made to her inside that world led instead toward betrayal and death beneath the floor of a barn. And perhaps that is the most haunting aspect of the entire case. Not the dreams, not the execution, not even the grotesque relics left behind afterward. The most haunting truth is how ordinary the beginning must have seemed. A meeting, a promise of marriage, a journey toward what Maria believed was a new life. Then silence, then disappearance, then nearly a year of lies carefully constructed to erase her existence. In the end, the Red Barn murder survived because it forced people to confront uncomfortable realities about trust, power, reputation, and violence. It exposed how easily manipulation can flourish when vulnerability meets deception. And long after the sensational details faded into legend, one image remained fixed within British cultural memory. A young woman buried beneath a red barn while the world above continued unaware.